Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Larry Sprung, a CFP and the author of Financial Planning Made Personal, here to tell us about financial planning for your family's future. Thank you so much for joining me today, Larry.
Hey, thank you for having me, Rosemary. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, Larry, how do you prioritize financial goals when planning for your family's future, considering aspects like children's education and retirement?
Yeah, it's a challenge for families that have kids to, plan for their college education and their retirement at the same time. And it's really, like my book says, financial planning made personal. It's really personal to that family on how they prioritize that. The only thing that I say is, if there is an opportunity, there are opportunities to borrow for college. Not that we're a big fan of racking up debt, but you cannot really borrow for your retirement. So you have to figure out a way to balance the two. And that is a challenge for families with kids who are trying to balance both of those goals.
And about how much is it to raise a child these days, just from what, 0 to 18?
I mean, I've seen reports anywhere between, three-quarters of a million to $2 million. I mean, I guess it depends upon your own personal family lifestyle and what your expectations are for your children. But, they're not a cheap, venture. There's definitely a large price tag that goes along with having a family.
Right. And I'm hearing these days a lot of people are choosing not to have kids just because it's too expensive to have a child and own a home these days. But I'm wondering, do you think it's best to just, you mentioned it for college debt, to just leave that in your child's hand? Like, all right, this is your school. You have to figure it out. You have to take out the loans in your name.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to the family. I could share with you kind of the conversation that we had in our family. We have two kids. My sons now are 17 and 20, so my 20-year-old is in college. And one of the things that we started at a very early age with them, probably in middle school, was having the conversation about their college education. My wife and I both came from a state university here in New York, so we're a product of the state system, and we were both fortunate enough to come out of school with zero debt as a result of doing that. So, starting in middle school, we had the conversations with both my sons saying, if they went to a state university, that we would cover that expense or up to that expense. But unless there was a compelling reason that they wanted to go to another school, that we were not going to pay for that difference that was going to be in excess of that. Now, with that being said, my older son ended up going to Drexel in Philadelphia. But the reason why we were willing to make that jump for him was twofold. One is he himself got a very significant scholarship on his own that brought it much closer to the cost of what a state university would be. And secondly, they have a program, a co-op program, where basically he has 3 6 months periods during his schooling where he actually works as a W-2 employee. So he gets some real life experience while going to school. So we were willing to, foot the slightly larger bill than the state university. But I think it's important for families to start having that discussion, whether it be, hey, we're going to foot the bill for a state university and anything above that's on your own, or, we expect you to go to community college for a couple years before you go to university, kind of figure it out. And I think a lot of that stems upon their financial situation and what their goals are for their children. But there are many different ways to get to the same result.
And so, what tips do you have for those who are deciding to pay for their children's college, most of it or all of it, for budgeting that over the years?
Start early. The earlier you start, the better. And I share this with folks in my book. People might think I'm crazy, but I started a 529 plan for my kids before I even had kids. I started a 529 plan in like 1998. My first son was born in 2003. And I started putting money away for my future kids' education. And the point here is, by starting that early, essentially now that I'm using that money for his education, about 70 cents on every dollar that I'm taking out to pay for his college education is from growth within the account, compounding interest. And only 30% is representative of monies that I put in. So for families that are looking to foot some or all of their child's education, I would highly suggest, either starting early, maybe not as early as I did before they're born in anticipation of having kids, but certainly as soon as they are born, start thinking about what vehicles are best for you and your family, and start saving for them early, because you're going to take advantage of 18 years roughly of compounding growth, which is going to allow your money to grow over a long period of time and hopefully alleviate some of that financial outlay by you, because you've taken advantage of those monies growing over time.
Well, you started early and you said you had your child in 2003. So let's say when the financial crisis in 2008 happened, did that poke a hole in your plans at all? Did that shift things?
So listen, like everybody else, was I nervous? Yes, because obviously this was money that was earmarked for a specific time frame and goal, and essentially we were looking at the beginning to use it in 2021. Roughly 18 years from his birth. So it had a specific time frame, whereas my retirement date was significantly further off. So I was less worried about the retirement money, more worried about the the college savings money. But at the same time, it didn't shift how I was investing. I stayed the course. I ended up benefiting from that greatly because things ended up rebounding. But it was definitely, a more challenging time seeing those funds decline in value after being used to seeing them increase for so long. But for those people that enter a situation that might experience something similar, I think you have to look at the time frame, right? Even though it was 2008, 5 years after I started, I still had 13 years, a pretty nice time frame ahead of me, where I felt confident that things would rebound and be in a position that I would be well positioned. Now, if I was 2 years from needing those funds for my son, I think I would have taken a different stance, right? And felt a little bit differently. But at the same time, I think if I was that close to him needing funds for schooling, I probably would have been a little bit more conservative with those funds than I was at that time. So, I think you have to be mindful along the way. You can't just invest the funds and then forget about them. You have to be mindful and look at them and evaluate them and see if changes need to be made, as you have the account in place for those kids.
Well, what tips do you have for those who are caring for elderly members? A lot of people, they're not saving up for elderly care. What tips do you have when that just kind of hits you in life?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's probably one of the biggest question marks when working with families and planning for their future and their retirement, because the best laid plans can really go awry under a health situation or even a long-term care situation. So, the thing that you need to do in regards to that is start having those conversations with families early. And I suggest, if this is a concern for you and your family, that you look to engage a financial advisor, somebody who's a fiduciary financial advisor, not a broker, but somebody who has to act in your best interest, and have that conversation with them. And the earlier you do it, just like we talked about starting investing early for college education, these types of conversations about health and long-term care should also start early, because the earlier you start them, you have different options, different methods to go about potentially protecting you and your family from a health or a long-term care need. You have to figure out, am I going to self-insure? Am I going to have a savings put aside to help me with these costs later on in life? Or am I going to buy an insurance policy, whether it be a long-term care policy to help me with these costs, or now they have hybrid policies that offer insurance, life insurance benefits and long-term care benefits? Or am I going to simply rely on maybe my kids taking care of me at some point in the future? So I think it's very important to, number one, have those conversations early. Two, design and develop a game plan on how you're going to potentially tackle these challenges if they arise, and three, communicate it to those, to your loved ones, so everybody understands how you're planning to approach this process for you.
So you mentioned life insurance, and I'm wondering how soon should one consider getting life insurance?
So, I mean, that depends on everybody's, personal facts and circumstances. But, certainly if you're at a point where you have a mortgage, you have a home, and you have a significant other, you have kids, you have responsibilities, people are relying on you and your income, then that's usually a good indication that life insurance is something that you should look at, because you don't want to end up in a position where something happens to you and you leave your significant other or your parents, with a debt that can't be covered. So, usually as you start entering those life stages where you're getting married, having kids, buying houses, and it may be all of the above. You may need to approach life insurance when you buy your first property, and that might be your first policy. And then when you get married, you may want to relook at that policy to see if it's enough. And then when you have kids. So anytime you have a major life event like that is a time to revisit, reevaluate, and see if what you have in place is still necessary, or you need more or less than what you currently have.
Well, are there any tools or resources that you use that you find helpful in managing and tracking your family's financial goals?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, we do that for families. So that's part of our planning process. I think finding the right fiduciary financial advisor could be extremely helpful for those that don't want to do it on their own. If they want to do it on their own, a very easy way to do it is, we think about QuickBooks, right? Most people are familiar with what QuickBooks is. It's a bookkeeping software typically for a business. But essentially, you can use that as a tool or a similar software to QuickBooks. You could use it as a tool for your family. You could just set up your family as a business and have it track money's coming in, money's going out, where your investments are, how they're growing, how you're accumulating assets towards a specific goal, and you can at any given time see what your net worth and your balance sheet looks like. So it's a good tool, but if you're not going to be somebody who's going to do it on your own and do it yourself, certainly a fiduciary financial advisor, most of them, if not all, have some kind of tool or software that they use to track those goals and your progress to it. I mean, that's something we do every day with the families we serve. A lot of our meetings are talking about what their goals are, and maybe their goals change. We just had a family yesterday that I spoke with that they're considering moving to a new home, and they wanted to know if moving to that home would put them in a better position financially than they are now, worse, or the same. And we pulled up their financial plan and basically walked through it. And it looked like to us, from a planning standpoint, that it would put them in a better position long term and would not hinder their short term goals. So it looks like they're moving forward with it. So an advisor could be a very vital component of your family's financial team if this isn't something that you want to go out on your own.
Well, Larry, is there anything else on your radar regarding financial planning, family financial planning, that you believe should be on ours?
Yeah, I think one thing that gets overlooked a lot of times when families or people in general are thinking about retirement is a lot of times when they talk to an advisor or work with an advisor, or even think about it by themselves, they think about it in terms of dollars and cents only. And what I mean by that is they try to figure out, how much money am I going to need in retirement to retire or stop working, right? And I would argue that that is only one component of that decision-making process. Where people kind of fail and where there's a challenge is they don't think about the mental and social aspects of what retirement's going to look like. And just to give you an example, we've had many people who have a retirement date in mind, right? They're financially ready, they're financially secure, they have the money set up that they need for retirement, and within 3 months of retirement, they are absolutely miserable. And the reason is because they spent all this time accumulating money, all this time working. They didn't spend time developing hobbies, interests, friends, relationships outside of the work environment that they may have been in for the last 30 or 40 years. And it's very difficult for them to transition. So we work with families not only on the financial aspect of things and making sure that the dollars and cents line up, but we also talk to them about how they're going to mentally and socially prepare for retirement. 10 years before retirement, they should make sure that they have friends outside of work. They have interests outside of work and start exploring those. So when they do retire, it's not that they're stuck sitting in a chair watching 40 hours a week of television, that they're out playing golf, following charitable endeavors, whatever is really meaningful to them, because the money's great and it'll help them live a comfortable retirement financially. But if they don't have that stimulation and that fulfillment in their life, the money's meaningless. It's really about the full package, and they have to, and we, impress upon them the importance of thinking about those mental and social aspects, which are very important to having a successful and very enjoyable retirement.
Wow. Well, I did not expect you to go there, but I completely agree with that. One of my older aunts, she would always say, like, when you stop working, you start dying. And that's probably what she means. People are just painfully bored. They have nothing to do when they
Mhm.
finish working.
It's very tough. We've had people just go back and, drive a school bus just to take up 20, 25 hours a week because
Yeah.
they just don't want to be sitting around doing nothing. And it makes sense. We've had people go back to work full time. I think that
Hmm.
there's this misnomer because as we hear in the news and whatnot, we hear this statistic that people are working longer. And I feel like the assumption is people are working longer because financially they have to. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people out there working past their, quote unquote retirement age because they have to and they need the money. But there's also a very large contingent that's working not because they need the money, but they need the fulfillment. They need that emotional
Yeah.
and mental stimulation, and that's how they've gotten their mental stimulation and motivation over the last 20 to 40 years, and it's just comfortable. So it's important to develop those interests outside of work and make that transition a lot easier and a lot more meaningful. And maybe if your aunt starts trying that, maybe she'll have a different take on it. Who knows?
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Larry. You've been great.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's a pleasure. I appreciate it.
For sure.